Today I wanted to talk about a concept called comparative suffering. When fear and scarcity are present, it is a combination that can be difficult to navigate. Fear and scarcity can cause us to feel out of control. As humans, when we feel out of control, that is something that we tend to struggle with. For most of us, control is something that we tend to find calming, right? It is when we feel in control, that is something that we really, really like. I've kind of lightheartedly said in the past videos that some of us like control more than others, but nonetheless, it gives us a sense of calm when we are able to feel like we're in control, which is understandable, right? I mean, when we feel like we're able to be in control of either a situation or an event, it just is that. It gives us a little bit more calm. But when you add now fear and or scarcity into the mix, that is two things that can cause us to feel out of control. So oftentimes when this happens, we look for blame, right? Whether that is blame of a person or blame of a situation. And the reason that we do this is because what we're looking for is to help us to feel like we're in control again, right? Our ability to find a rationale for why something has happened, or i.e. blame for the situation, helps us feel like, oh, okay, well, this happened because this person was the blame or this situation was the blame. And then we feel like we have control back of the situation again because we have a reason for why it happened, if that makes sense. At times when scarcity and fear are in play or happen together, they can trigger comparison. And so we already live in a world where comparison runs rampant, right? It happens on social media, it happens through the news. We already have access to the news a lot, 24/7 on through our fingertips, right? And so our ability to be able to compare is really, really, really high right now in our world. And so the really hard part about comparison when we're talking about pain is that then there starts to become this ranking almost of pain, right? Let me think of a way to try to explain it. Like, it's almost a scaling of my pain versus somebody else's pain, if that makes sense, right? Your situation of what you're dealing with versus what my situation of what I'm dealing with, and then we're going to put that on a scale comparison, right? So when this starts to happen, think about how invalidating our feelings start to become when this happens. What I'm dealing with compared to what so-and-so is dealing with, well, now we start to rank pain, right? My pain is not as bad as so-and-so's because, I don't know, they lost their job, their family member just died, something awful just happened to their family, their adult child is struggling in a way that I wouldn't even understand, right? So when you start to compare those types of things to deal with what you're trying to manage on the inside, now you can't validate your own feelings and you start to just push them away. You think, oh, I can't handle the things that I'm dealing with because it's not anything compared to what somebody else is dealing with. So I don't even need to face what I'm handling because it's nothing compared to what the neighbors are dealing with, or so-and-so down the street is handling, or the coworker that I was talking to at work and what some of the things are that they're dealing with. So this is where that comparison piece is super, super dangerous, because your feelings in what you're dealing with are just as valid as what they're dealing with, regardless of where it lands on a pain scale, right? So that comparison or comparative suffering, it needs to not happen. Part of what also happens is whatever it is you're feeling, you're invalidating what it is you feel, right? So by saying my pain is less than somebody else's, hear what you're saying. You're invalidating whatever it is that you feel. One of the things that you're also doing is you're not allowing yourself to feel it, right? By saying what I'm dealing with in this moment or in these times is less than what somebody else is dealing with, you're just pushing it away. You're shoving it to the side. You're saying it's not necessary to handle or to even recognize. And so you're just ignoring it, I guess, essentially, or stuffing it away. Depends on what it is that you do with your feelings. Let me give an example of this. What if you happen to struggle with anxiety? Whatever level by which you struggle with anxiety, it's starting to impact your life, right? You're struggling to manage everyday life effectively. You start to compare what you deal with your anxiety with somebody that you happen to know, or a friend of a friend that you happen to know who struggles with full-blown panic attacks. Well, if you compare a panic attack to anxiety, there is no contest, but it isn't a contest. You can't compare the two, because panic attacks and anxiety, first of all, they're two different diagnoses. They're not the same thing. And so to say like your ability to function with anxiety and somebody's ability to function with panic attacks, you can't even compare the two. Hopefully that's something that can help you to kind of make sense of that. By using that example, what that also does for the individual who's struggling with the anxiety, what that does is prevents you, if you're the individual struggling with the anxiety, it stops you from getting help. Right? If you say, well, I don't have panic attacks, so therefore I don't need help, which is not true, by the way. But if that's what you tell yourself, you now stop at seeking help because you think that your problem's not big enough, or it's not compared to what somebody else's problem is, right? And now you suffer alone because you think that your problem is not big enough, or it's not valid enough, or whatever it is that's the story that you're telling inside of your head. So can you see why comparative suffering is so, I guess dangerous would be the word that I would use, because I think that it is dangerous. We can't compare our suffering to somebody else's suffering. The example that I just gave, both individuals could benefit from getting help, right? The person that struggles with panic attacks and the person who struggles with the anxiety. However, comparing the situations, it's not really beneficial. It doesn't do anyone any good, because comparative suffering is just problematic. The feelings are valid that the individual that's starting to struggle with the anxiety, it's valid, right? They're struggling to effectively navigate their lives, and whether they feel like it's as severe or as impactful as somebody else, it doesn't really matter. The feelings are still there, and they need to just validate that and recognize that. If we go back to that pain ranking idea that I talked about just a moment ago, the other thing that happens with pain ranking is that because then we invalidate our feelings like I just talked about, what ends up happening is then we end up stuffing our feelings, right? What we're saying is, my feelings are not valid enough, so I'm just going to push them away. So what ends up happening is you stuff your feelings. You numb them in some way, shape, or form. You push them away in some way, thinking that they just go away. Well, that's not how it works. Feelings don't just go away. They don't just get stuffed and hide and never come back. In fact, what ends up happening is that they grow exponentially. In particular, the difficult emotions, pain, fear, these types of emotions, they grow exponentially. So you think that you've avoided them by stuffing them away, but what they end up doing is coming back, I don't want to say 10 times bigger, but they're bigger. They're larger than they were when they originally surfaced, because you've pushed them away. So when you think that you've pushed them away and avoided them, what's actually happened when they resurface is that they're exponentially larger. Not to mention, some of the things that can happen then is that shame can grow. So I'm going to talk about what shame is in just one second, but shame then for having these feelings is, I shouldn't be having these feelings because my pain isn't big enough, right? You hear that? Like, I don't have a big enough problem to even be dealing with this, because look at how other people are suffering. So now you've just added a layer of shame on top of that. So what is shame? Shame oftentimes gets interchanged with guilt, and guilt is very, very different than shame. So just a quick definition: guilt is I've done something wrong and I feel bad about it, and shame is I've done something wrong and therefore I am bad. So guilt is a focus on actions, right? Something I've done, behaviors, and shame is a focus on self, right? I've done something wrong and therefore I am bad. So shame is saying I am somehow faulty, something's wrong with me because I have these feelings, right? And so now you've got doubled down emotions that have now resurfaced because you've stuffed them away, and now you've got shame on top of it because you shouldn't be having these feelings because your pain shouldn't be there at all. You almost believe that somehow you're flawed for having these. That's what shame tells you. To be fair, this isn't truth. This is what shame says, is somehow you're flawed for having these emotions or feelings, because you shouldn't even be having these feelings because your pain's not as bad as the neighbor down the street or the other person that you know who's struggling harder and more severely than you are. So it's just like this snowball effect that starts happening. Allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel and give yourself permission to feel what you need to feel prevents not only the comparative suffering piece from happening, it also helps you to maybe take the steps that you need to get help. What also happens is that it allows yourself to have empathy. Well, guess what stops shame from growing? Empathy. If you have shame, one of the best antidotes to shame is having empathy. Shame can't survive if it's doused with empathy. So if you have empathy for your situation, for what's going on, for how you're feeling, shame can't survive. And you also are more than likely able to take steps to getting whatever help you might need in situations when you're struggling, because that comparative suffering cycle could potentially stop, because you're not going to be looking at, well, somebody else is struggling worse than I am. I need to stop looking for help because I'm not suffering as bad as everybody else is. Someone else has it far worse than I do. So that cycle stops in that when empathy is given. What would empathy for self look like, right? In previous videos, we've talked about self-compassion. Self-compassion is empathy for self. You having a compassionate voice, how you talk to yourself, the way that you give, I guess kind words would be the way that I would explain it, to yourself when you're struggling. Instead of saying, like, I don't want to say like, suck it up, someone else has got it harder than you, but that's kind of the way that we talk to ourselves. Like, let's be honest. We're mean to ourselves inside of our own head. So instead of saying something harsh like that, say something like, this is a hard situation. It doesn't matter what anyone else is dealing with. I'm struggling. I'm feeling blank, whatever it is you're feeling. And it's okay that I'm feeling this way. And it's also okay if I might feel like I need some help. Comparing is dangerous, and it is also not effective. Comparative suffering is not helpful as well, right? I mean, we've given a number of examples just in talking today in why it's not helpful. It can stop growth. It can prevent us from recognizing maybe what we might need. It can also stop us from getting the help that we might need. It can also stop us from recognizing what we might be feeling, which, yes, quintessential therapist thing. Not knowing what we're feeling is not necessarily a good thing. We need to understand what it is we're feeling in order to navigate the world that we live in. So it's not helpful when we're comparing, because it stops us from knowing what it is that we're feeling, because, well, we know what we're feeling, but we're stuffing it by comparing it with other people. And then on top of that, it can add shame when we're comparing it to other people, which is also very dangerous, as we've talked about also. Hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully these are helpful concepts for you. I appreciate you watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks.